Okay, good morning everyone. So this is maybe like just a closing idea. Here's a closing idea about the subject of awaiting the coming of Moshiach. And these are just like a sprinkling of ideas that it's worthwhile to be aware of. We quoted the Chida many times, who understands the meaning of the bracha as Semach David Avdecha Mehiras Atzmiach. The Chida explains that awaiting the coming of Moshiach is so important and so powerful that in its merit alone, Moshiach could come. That's what we mean when we say in davening. We say, Es semach David avdecha mehiras atzmiach, v'karnoi taram b'shuasecha, ki lishuascha kivin kol hayom. Hashem, make the salvation flourish in the merit that we await your salvation. Meaning, awaiting the salvation of Hashem is so great and so important and so powerful. In its merit, the Geula will come. We mentioned that Chida a number of times, and in light of that, I want to share with you a Yalkut Shemoini on Eicha, Remez Taf Taf Kuf Tzadi Zayin. That when the Avos HaKadoshim, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Moshe, when they cried about the Churban Beis HaMikdash and the Galus, and they said, Ribono Shel Olam, maybe you're never going to take back Klal Yisrael. Hashem said, don't say that. Hashem said, Yesh dar shehu mitzapeh lemalchusi. There's a generation that awaits my malchus. Umiyad heim negalim, and they will be redeemed immediately. Shenemar v'yesh tikva la'acharisech no'am Hashem v'shavu banim legvulam. Which the Medrash is reading. V'yesh tikva la'acharisech. If you hope for the Mashiach, v'shavu banim legvulam, then Hashem will return us to Eretz Yisrael. So in the merit of genuinely awaiting the coming of Mashiach, the Geula will happen. So that's a very important yediyah, that the zechus of awaiting the coming of Mashiach is so powerful that alone will bring the Geula. So I want to share with you something very important. In Parshas Boy, the pasuk says as follows: Leil Shimurim Hu Hashem. It is a night of watching for Hashem. Lahoitziam me'aretz Mitzrayim, to take them out of Mitzrayim. Hu la'alayla hazeh. This night, Lashem, Shimurim watched l'chol b'nei Yisrael l'dayraisam. If you notice, this pasuk says the word Shimurim twice. It says Leil Shimurim Hu Hashem. Shimurim l'chol b'nei Yisrael l'dayraisam. Why does it say Shimurim twice? Says the Sfarno. Leil Shimurim Hu Hashem. Shahaya mitzapeh lohoitziam. God was yearning to take us out of Mitzrayim. Ki lo yinam ilibai. He never really wanted to afflict us from his heart. But what could he do? Avaloi matzas yisam muchanim ruim legula. He did not find the Jewish people were ready and worthy to be redeemed. Ad oisa halayla. God was awaiting and yearning to redeem us from Mitzrayim, ki chafetz chesedhu, because He desires kindness, like it says, Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu mechashev es haketz. So when Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, He was waiting to redeem us. He was mitzapeh to redeem us. He was yearning to redeem us. That's why it says Shimurim first time. But why does it say Shimurim a second time? It says the Sfarno, Hu halayla hazeh Shimurim. Just like Hashem was watching and yearning and waiting to redeem us from Mitzrayim, God is awaiting and yearning to redeem us in the future. So in other words, if you were to ask, what is Ribono Shel Olam doing right now? He's yearning to redeem us. Maybe we're not worthy yet. We're not prepared yet. But the same way Hashem was shomer u'mitzapeh to redeem us, just like Hashem was mitzapeh lohoitziam mi'Mitzrayim, k'moi shahaya mishamer u'mitzapeh legulas Yisrael, Kainhu mishamer u'mitzapeh legulas Yisrael ho'asida. God is awaiting and yearning to redeem us in the future. Therefore, l'chol b'nei Yisrael. That's what Chazal mean. B'nisan nigalu u'v'nisan asidan ligael. Just like He was awaiting and yearning to redeem us from Mitzrayim, He is currently awaiting and yearning to redeem us now. Isn't that amazing? By the way, the Baal HaTurim points out, twice in Tanakh it says Shiurim. In the beginning of this pasuk, and in the end of this pasuk. Because Hashem divided that night into two. The first half was for Gulas Mitzrayim, and the second half is for the Gula HaSidah. So the following idea occurred to me this morning. Does God keep the Torah? There's such an idea, Hashem keeps the Torah. There's an idea, the Gemara says Hashem puts on tefillin. And the Gemara even asks, what does it say in Hashem's tefillin? In fact, the Medrash goes so far as to ask, how does Hashem make it rain on Shabbos, but it's Zriya? You can't water the grass on Shabbos. The Medrash deals with that question. God keeps the Torah. But I have a question. Does it say in the Chumash, God puts on tefillin? No. The Gemara says it. Does it say in the Torah, God keeps Shabbos? No. The Gemara says it. But we believe God keeps the Torah. But is there any mitzvah that the Torah says that Hashem does? There's a Torah, in other words, we believe Hashem keeps all the mitzvahs. But is there any mitzvah that the Torah says Hashem does? Yeah, we just learned it. The pasuk says Hashem is mitzapeh liyeshua. Right? Of all the mitzvahs, of all the good deeds that there are, there's only one good deed that the Torah says Hashem does. That Hashem is awaiting to bring the Geula. So it comes out two things. Number one, it comes out that when we await the coming of Moshiach, we're fulfilling something very great. You know what we're doing? We're going in the ways of Hashem. We know that one of the great mitzvahs in the Torah is v'halachta b'drachav, to emulate Hashem. So when we're awaiting the Geula, we're emulating Hashem. Because what's Hashem doing right now? He's awaiting to redeem us. So when we await the redemption, we're fulfilling v'halachta b'drachav. So that elevates the concept and the importance of awaiting the coming of Mashiach to something very grand and something very tremendous. Because we're emulating Hashem. And number two, maybe this is another reason why it's one of the principles of Judaism. Because of all the things, of all the mitzvahs Hashem does, the Chumash only writes about one of them. Which mitzvah? Hu halayla hazel lashem shimurim l'chol b'nei Yisrael l'doiraisam. That this night, Hashem is awaiting and yearning to redeem the Jewish people for all generations. So maybe the reason why awaiting the coming of Mashiach is such a fundamental tenet of faith, let's just point out, on Friday, or by Shal Shudas, we explained why it could be a tenet of faith, why the idea that Hashem will redeem us is a tenet of faith, but why is awaiting the coming of Mashiach a tenet of faith? Where the Rambam writes, you not only have to believe in it, you have to await it. Why is that so fundamental? Maybe we could say because of all the good deeds that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, there's only one mitzvah that the Torah writes explicitly that Hashem does. Namely, that Hashem is awaiting the coming of Mashiach. So what a tremendous thing is, every time you walk out of a door and you look at the mezuzah and you remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim and we then await for the coming of Mashiach, you're fulfilling something very great. And I'm going to end off with this. This is a Sefer HaChaim. It was written by the brother of the Maharal of Prague, Rabbeinu Chaim ben Rab Betzalel. He writes in Sefer HaChaim, which is composed of 5 svarim, in the 5th book. Is everyone familiar with the Gemara in Ksubis? That anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz, it's like he has no God and he's serving idols. Doesn't sound very complimentary about living in the 5 towns. Right? Because the 5 towns is not Eretz Yisrael. It's not in the land of Israel. And the Gemara in Ksubah says, Kol mi shadar b'chutz la'aretz, nase kemi she'ein lo Elokim. It's like you have no God. U'ke'ilu oived avodah zara. Says the brother Maharal of Prague. That's if you establish yourself in Chutz La'aretz. What does that mean if you establish yourself in Chutz La'aretz? He says that a few paragraphs earlier, He says there are a lot of Jews, they've already given up hope from the Geula. So they think they're residents of the country they live in, and they build these beautiful homes, very impressive, and they ignore the Holy Land. Says the Gemara in Baba Basra, and says the brother Maral of Prague, certainly a person is allowed to have a nice house. It gives a person peace of mind, but you're supposed to leave over an amma by amma in the front of the doorway. Why? Because this way, every time you walk in and out of the house, you realize, this is not my permanent home. One day I'm going to leave this house, and I'm going to go to Yerushalayim. Meaning, the brother Maral of saying, somebody who's excessively involved in beautifying their home, then they're saying, this is my home right over here. This is my main home. So it's like they're saying, I don't really believe Moshiach will ever come. So it's important to have a reminder by the doorway, you know what? This is where I'm living temporarily until the Geula happens. It allows us to be focused on and to live with the recognition that this is only a temporary station. It's not a destination. But those who make their home their final destination, it shows they don't really yearn for the Geula. But listen to this. It's only someone who is dar b'chutz haaretz, someone who is permanently settled in chutz haaretz. He says, this is my house, this is where I'm going to be buried. He wants chutz haaretz to be his permanent residence. It's like he denies God. But someone who's mitzape liyeshua, aval hamitzape tamid liyeshuas hagula, one who is always yearning for the coming of the salvation, ve'enoi v'libay sham kol hayamim, and his eye and his heart is always focused on that. Chalila shehei kovet avodah zarah. Heaven forbid he's not an idolater. Someone who's always being mitzape liyeshua, it's as if he's right now living in Eretz Yisrael. Someone who's always thinking about, when am I going to go back to Eretz Yisrael? When is Moshiach going to come? When will Hashem redeem the Jewish people? One who is always focused on Eretz Yisrael and the Geula. Ve'enoi v'libay sham kol hayamim, male olav hakasuv ki'ilu dar v'amad b'soicha. It's considered like he lives there, he's standing in there, and that's why we face Eretz Yisrael when we daven, to show that's what our attention is toward. And if you do that, so someone who builds his mansion in New York, and every day he's focused on expanding and beautifying. So he says, this is where I live, this is where I'm gonna be, this is where I'm always gonna be. It's like he's given up on the salvation. It's like he has no God. But someone, even if he lives in America, even if he lives in New York, even if he lives in the 5 towns, but he's always thinking about, when's Hashem going to bring us to Eretz Yisrael? When is the Geula going to happen? Someone who's always mitzape liyeshua, says the Sefer HaChaim, if einoi v'libay sham, mala olav hakasav ki'ilu dar v'amad b'soicha. So today, we're learning a number of very important ideas about being mitzape liyeshua. Number 1, you're emulating the ways of Hashem. Hashem is waiting for this Yeshua. So if I'm awaiting Mashiach, I'm emulating HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number 2, this is the only mitzvah that the Chumash writes Hashem does. So think about how important it is then for us to do it. We learned from the Yalkut Shimoni that in the merit of awaiting the coming of Mashiach, the Mashiach will come. And finally, the idea that if someone lives in Chutz Haaretz, they're considered an idolater, that's only if they're totally, solely immersed and focused excessively in their home. But someone who's always awaiting, when am I getting out of here already? And they have something by their door that reminds them of the Churban, and they're always thinking about, how am I going to get to Eretz Yisrael? That's a very high madrega. And Mala Olav Hakasav Ki'ilu Dar V'Amad B'Soicha, Hashem considers it as if they live there. Okay, we should taka b'zoicha to make being Mitzape Yeshua a part of our focus, and in that merit, Hashem, we should be zoicha to see the Yeshua b'karov b'yameinu. Amen. Ken Yiratzon. Thank you very much.